Good morning, everyone. Sorry, just getting Facebook going there. I just want to kind of give a short recap for those of you who are tuning in right now and joining us online about today in particular. If you happen to have seen online, you know that this is not an in-person service. There's no worship or music or anything like that. And that is because we did have several members contract COVID, as well as we have several members of our worship team out for various reasons. And so what happened, I just want to give some clarity for those of you who worship here and who attend online. It appears in the conversations that I've had and speaking with the people who have contracted COVID, myself and Olivia included, that many of us contracted COVID previous to worship on Sunday. So it seems that most of us had been in contact with someone who had COVID, came to church on Sunday not knowing, and then in the following days got COVID. So while there are several members of our congregation who are currently battling and going through the effects of COVID and everything like that, it does not seem like it started here. What actually happened, from my understanding, and again, talking with everyone who is currently tested COVID positive, is that each of us, through various means, somehow contracted it or got it before coming and were not symptomatic on Sunday. Everyone who was feeling sick Sunday did not come to church, so there were a few members who had sniffles and a cold, and so they did not come. And so I just wanted to kind of give that update for why things are so different. Olivia obviously is not feeling too great. COVID's affected her a little bit better. I'm going to try my best not to have a coughing fit and to be able to get through the message that God has put on my heart. Obviously, as many of you know, the Nailers have gotten back from Toronto and their son being with their son Jonathan as he was going there for tests, and we didn't want to put anyone out at risk. So it seems things seem a little bit different today as you're watching at home. That is why. And for those of you who are a part of our email listing and everything like that, I just wanted to give you an update on how that is. Know that moving forward, the LBA and leadership, we're looking at how exactly we'll proceed if there is an outbreak or if another crazy situation, I would call a perfect storm, kind of happens like it did before. We are trying to figure out how we can best move forward, obviously to keep everyone safe so that way we can worship the risen Lord together. And so I just ask that you join me now as we dive in. Obviously things are different because of this. We don't have someone in the back. It is just me here to reduce the contact and everything. So you're gonna need a Bible today. If you're joining at home and you're used to the words being up on the screen or up on your TV or anything, that's not gonna happen today. And so you will need a Bible if you want to write out what the point is or the message. You're going to need a pen and paper, and let's just explore God's word today as we celebrate Palm Sunday and we celebrate the start of the week leading up to Christ's death. I'd like to start this morning with two different stories. The first story, Olivia and I, we had just gotten married. Our anniversary is in June. Our 10-year anniversary is in June. We had just gotten married, so this was like a few months into our marriage. And before we had gotten married, I had always worked at this camp called Discipleship Retreat in New York. And I would go there and I would teach, and a lot of times I would serve as a counselor. And I had been doing this. I had been attending the camp since 6th grade. And after I had graduated the camp, which was 4 years long, so 10th grade, I started teaching, being a co-counselor and a counselor, and then all the way through college, right? So we're going on close to 10 years that I've been attending this camp. And I told the camp director, I said, you know what? Put me down for the normal seminars that I teach. Put me down for the normal stuff that I do. We're going to be there even though we're newly married. Like, I'm super excited. I want Olivia to experience this camp that has transformed my life and has changed me in so many ways. So So put us down. And Olivia wants to help out too. Like she wants to do something. You can trust her. She's a smart cookie. And this is the first time that she's meeting a lot of the people that we would end up working with. And we arrive at the camp. Excuse me. We arrive at the camp after traveling from New Brunswick all the way down for this like 3-day camp. And we get there. And I walk into the cafeteria, and I'm like, all right, we're here. Can you tell us where our rooms are? Where are we going to be staying? And they're like, oh, well, Olivia, we've put in this room, and Dave, we put you in boys cabin 7. And I was like, boys cabin 7? And they're like, yeah, we put you down as a counselor. We put you down to watch them, to be with the teens and, to kind of pour into them. And the thing is normally you would start off with teens and be their counselor for 4 years. And they were just randomly putting me in with these third-year guys that I had no connection to whatsoever. And I was furious. Like, I was heated. I was so mad that I didn't even eat dinner. I just walked out. Like, I just walked out. I was like, there's no way that they are doing this. Not only am I newly married, not only is this my wife's my first time here, but you really want me, after saying that I would just be teaching, I wouldn't be a counselor, you want me to now be a counselor. Like, not asking if I was cool with it or anything, just writing me down, just assuming. I was furious. I was ticked. And I left, and I was like, you know what, there's no way. And finally, the director comes to me, and he's like, yo, what's up? And I was like, you didn't even talk to me. Like, I get in the past, I have done all these things, and I would serve however I could serve. But, like, this is my wife's first time here. I wanted to spend time with her. Like, this is almost like a little mini vacation for me. And you didn't even ask me. You just put me with a bunch of guys that I don't know, and you made me responsible for them when I am coming here and really doing a favor for you in teaching so many of these classes. I was furious. My expectation, or the reality, the mindset of why I was going there completely changed. Second story that I want to share with you. While I was a youth pastor, my first year, there was this thing called Rally in the Valley. And basically, it was a large youth conference, and all the teens in the area would come for a 2-day event, and it was just supposed to be this awesome time of games and activities and meaningful messages, like a typical youth rally, loud music, all of that. And I remember we got there, and I had been pumping this up. Like, this is going to be so awesome. I can't tell you how awesome this is going to be. Like, you're going to want to come, save up your money. We're going to do fundraisers and everything. And we had a huge group come out to this first year. And I get there, and I had been pumped about this. And when I say I have been pumped, it wasn't like, man, I'm super excited to go to this youth rally and sleep on a floor for 2 days in a church. I had been pumped because everyone was telling me how awesome Rally in the Valley was. They're like, Rally in the Valley is the best thing. Like, it is so cool. Like, you're going to have so much fun. Your teens can't miss it, Pastor Dave. Your teens can't miss it. All right. So we went. We get there. And the afternoon of the second day was so poorly planned that we ended up missing out on a majority of the activities. Our group had signed up for dodgeball because we loved dodgeball. But the thing is that dodgeball ended like an hour and a half into a 4-hour block of time. And at that point, because dodgeball had ended, we could no longer go to any other activities. And so I'm sitting there. We have nothing to do for this event that had been planned for us, that everyone was ramping up and saying, Pastor Dave, it's the best thing. That I'm like, what do we do? And so I took my teams back to the church that it was being held at. And I was like, we're going to play Ultimate Frisbee. And we start playing. They're having a blast and a lot of fun. And some of the other teams that were there for dodgeball that had also missed out showed up, and they started playing it. And it was a lot of fun. And they're like, well, we're kind of tired of Ultimate Frisbee. And I was like, all right, we're going to play a game called Get in Dave's Car. And they're like, what's that? And I'm like, we're just going to see how many teens we can fit in my car. And it's going to be awesome. And I kept pumping up like all these silly, like stupid things. And I'm like, how is this going, like it's just going to be fun. And believe it or not, the teens had fun. In fact, they had so much fun that the following year, despite how poorly planned it had been, they were ramping up and excited to go again. Because their mindset, Their mindset was, well, we did all these crazy things even though these weren't planned. Like Pastor Dave just had these things that we did. See, in both of these stories, there was a mindset, right? In the first one, I had a mindset that negatively affected my time at this camp because I thought I was doing one thing, and then I showed up and I actually wasn't doing what I was told, and I had all these other expectations and things put on me. The second mindset of the teens could have been really that, wow, this event sucks. Like, it's not that great of an event. Why did we spend all our money? Why did we come here? But because I had hyped it up and because I was being energetic for the things that we were doing, their mindset was, wow, this was really awesome. This was really awesome. Have you ever had your mindset change the view of something? Have you ever been in a situation? Have you ever been, maybe it was an event, maybe it was a family gathering, but your mindset changed your perspective on that event? Your mindset changed to perspective on that event. Maybe you went in grumpy and someone told the joke and you realized, oh, actually this party isn't that bad. This family get-together isn't that bad. Or you go in to a family event, or you go to a work event, or you go into something like that, and you're just so miserable that even though there's these great things going on, you don't enjoy it. You know what I'm talking about? Can you think of an instance where your mindset has changed how it is that you view something? Last week, we finished our Promise Keeper series. And we looked at the different promises that God had made. And we talked about how these promises that God has kept, these promises that God has made, should make us desire to want to be in relationship with us. It should draw us closer to God. And if we don't know God, if we don't know Jesus, then these promises should entice us to want to know more about God, should entice us to want to know more about Jesus. Well, the follow-up to that series is Promise Breaker. And I've had several people ask me, well, what does that mean? We're going to be looking today, Good Friday, and Easter Sunday at the promises that God has not kept. The promises that God has not kept. And before you switch off, before you're like, what are you talking about? There are some things that God has not kept as a promise. And so I want to dive in our first lesson here of Promise Breaker. And just excuse me real quick. If you open with me, the first passage we're going to look at is 1 Samuel chapter 8. And this is super important because we're in the middle of Palm Sunday, right? Like today is the day that in the story of Christ, in the life of Christ, he entered Israel as a triumphant king. He entered in with people shouting, Hosanna, laying down palm leaves, right? Ready to basically give their lives because they recognize that this is the Messiah. This is the king, the promised king that would come and set us all free. There was an expectation on Jesus when he entered Sunday morning. There was an expectation on his life, on the things that he was going to do. And that expectation, the expectation that we talk about on Palm Sunday, the expectations that the Israelites had for the Messiah, the expectations that they had for Jesus, come from the idea of a king. The expectations that Israel had come from the idea of the promised king that they were told about from the line of David that would rule over them, that would bring in a golden era, that would set them free and would establish his house. And so I want to look at what the original promise of a king was. And if you remember last year's Easter series, I'm not going to completely redo that, but I think it's important that we understand the mindset of Israel on a king. And so in chapter 8 of 1 Samuel, the people have come to Samuel, who is currently ruling over Israel as a judge, not as a king, but as a judge. And they said, we want a king like every other nation. We want someone who will go into battle with us. We want someone who will stand before and fight. And we want someone that will rule over us like all the other nations. And this is something that I found interesting as I was studying this, because they wanted someone who would go out and face war, right? Who would go first in wartime. But currently they were not at war, and they had no enemies that were planning on going to war. It was actually peacetime when they're coming to him, when they're coming to Samuel. And Samuel, on behalf of God, Samuel on behalf of God becomes upset. It's wrong for you to ask for a king. And God says to Samuel, no, they have rejected me. They haven't rejected you as judge. They haven't rejected you as ruler. They've rejected me, God, Yahweh, the person who's delivered them. They've rejected me as their king. And so give them a king, anoint a king for them, but make sure it's clear that they understand what a king is going to be like. Make sure that they understand what a king is going to do. Here is the expectations. Since they want a king who will go to war, since they want a king that will rule them like every other nation, here's the expectation for a king. And I'm just going to read briefly, right? Verses 10 through 18, and this is 1 Samuel 8. So Samuel reported the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king. He says, "These are the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them as chariots to be his horsemen, to run before his chariots, and he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of 50, and some to plow the ground and reap his harvest, and to make his implements of war and equipment for his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and your vineyards and your olive orchards and give them to his quarters. He will take 1/10 of your grain and your vineyard and give it to his officers and his quarters. He will take your male and female slaves and the best of your cattle and your donkey and put them to his work. He will take 1/10 of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. And in that day you will cry out because your king, whom you have chosen for yourself, but the Lord will not answer you in that day." Now I know I read that kind of fast, and there was an emphasis that I put on a few of those words. And the emphasis was the emphasis that Samuel was trying to convey to the people who were asking him for a king. See, you're asking for a king, and what's going to happen is this king is going to work for his glory. He is going to take from you. I stressed that while I was reading. He is going to take 1/10. That is a tax. He is going to take your sons and your daughters for him. He is going to take it so that way his kingdom will grow. He will take it for his army, not for your army, for his army. See, Samuel was trying to paint this picture of you're asking for a king, and what a king is going to do is a king is going to take from you. A king is going to demand of you, not necessarily for your own good. Yes, you are his people, but he is going to be concerned with establishing his wealth. He's going to be concerned about establishing his glory. He's going to be concerned about establishing and maintaining his borders, which, even though God has appointed this king, you're the one who asked for it. You are the one, referring to the people of Israel, who has asked for a king like this. And so he's trying to paint this picture that a king is going to be all about himself. And while a king during that time represented a god, that is the king of Israel would represent the God of Israel, they were asking while they were worshiping pagan gods. They were asking for a king while they were practicing things that were dishonoring to the God that they were asking for a king to represent. And so Samuel tries to paint this picture of this is what a king is going to do. A king may make Israel great in battle. A king may do this, but there's going to come a point where you're going to tire of a king. There's going to come a point where you no longer want a king because he's going to tax you so much, because he's going to do things that displeases you. And in that day, because you have rejected God as king, God will not hear you. Because you have decided that you want a physical human king instead of God as king. That is what is in the mind of the people as Jesus enters in. They are expecting a return of a physical king. They are expecting someone who is going to rule over them, who is going to make a great army, who is going to establish their name so that way their enemies, specifically the Romans and those others around him, will fear once again Israel because God is with them and is being represented in this physical king. That's the mindset of Israel on Palm Sunday. Last week we started reading various parts of Matthew 5 in the Sermon on the Mount. Sermon on the Mount being a collection of Jesus' teachings and is actually viewed as probably one of the most influential teachings on morality and ethics. Super affected, and really, if you look at any other teacher, they've pulled from the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount found in Matthew chapter 5 through 8, not only is this collection of Jesus' teachings, but also, as has been pointed out, it is kind of a declaration, right? This Sermon on the Mount sums up what Jesus is going to teach, but it also sums up, and I love the way that John Wesley puts it, it also sums up what the kingdom is going to be like. Christ is describing the kingdom of heaven. Christ is describing the kingdom of God. And if Christ is king, that is, if there is this expectation that Christ is going to be on Palm Sunday, the physical king that comes in and that frees them for everything, it should be a declaration of what his kingdom looks like. And that's exactly what it is. The Sermon on the Mount not only is ethical and moral teachings, it is also a description of what Christ as king will look like, what his kingdom will look like. And this is how he starts off his declaration of what the kingdom of God look like. This is how he starts off his moral teachings. And this is Matthew 5, and I'm going to read the first 11 verses. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for theirs will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And blessed are you when people rival you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." This is the equivalent of the State of the Union or the throne speech. Jesus is making a declaration of what the kingdom is going to be like, of those who would be his soldiers, if you want to look at it in that sense, those who would be his followers. And do you know what this king says? Do you know what Jesus says? Not that he's going to take, right? His focus in the Sermon on the Mount, and if you want to do this, read through chapters 5 all the way until chapter 9, right? Chapter 8. Read chapters 5 through chapters 8. And what you notice is that this moral teaching, what you notice about Jesus is that this is not about a king coming and taking. This is not about conquering. What Jesus does is he takes the law, he takes the teachings that are there, and he says it's not about following these because a king tells you to. It's not about just following these because God tells you to. It's about your heart. It's about what's inside here. It's about your spiritual life. Time and time again in this passage, he points out two things. The first is that he points out how you will be blessed, right? He actually starts off with that. You will be blessed if you act this way. Now, if you're blessed, that means God's pouring something out. He's giving you something. He's not taking. And Jesus starts off this declaration by talking about the blessings that come for those who are poor in spirit, for those who are meek, for those who are merciful. Not necessarily who you would think are going to be the movers and shakers in a kingdom. But Christ says these are going to be the movers and shakers in God's kingdom, and they are going to be the one who's blessed. The second thing that he points out as you read through this, and the second thing that he says often is, but I say to you. He'll give a teaching or he'll give an instruction on the law, and he'll say, but I say to you. And then he clarifies. An example is murder. If you hate your brother, but I say to you that anyone who is angry. And what he's doing there is he's taking the Pharisees' teachings. And the Pharisees' teaching was basically, as long as you don't kill someone, anything else is good. There were actually laws and restrictions to the point to where if I killed someone, then I sinned. But if I beat someone senseless, so they're in a coma, well, that's fine. And Christ comes and he says, no. It's not about just following the letter of the law. It's about the spirit of the law. And if you are angry with your brother, in God's eyes, in God's kingdom, that's just as bad as if you killed him. He's expanding it, and he's not saying forget the law. In fact, he starts off this whole discourse on, he starts off, but then he goes on, and he says, look, I am going to fulfill every letter. Don't think that because I'm talking about the spiritual side now, that the physical side no longer matters. Don't think that because I'm mentioning that you shouldn't be angry with your brother, that it's okay to kill your brother. Christ is painting this picture of what the kingdom is going to be like. And so, when the question comes, well, what promise did God break? On this Palm Sunday, I would like to be so bold as to say that God broke the promise of what a king would look like in Jesus. The idea of what a king would do, the idea of the king of Israel and what the king would ask for and what the king would demand is broken in Jesus as our king. God broke the promise that he had initially said of, I will not hear you, I will not listen to you, because you have demanded a king and you have rejected me as king. And instead, he puts forth Jesus as king and breaks the promise of always taking, of always receiving, so that way a nation or a physical person could be wealthy. God breaks the promise of a king in Jesus, so that way we can have a life we never knew. What Jesus is talking about, what Jesus desires for us to experience in being his followers, is more than just following law. He wants us to experience a spiritual side. He wants us to experience a life that was almost incapable because we live in a world that is affected by evil. A world in which we are torn apart from God. Christ is the king that God always wanted. Christ represents the king that God desires, because it's not just about following rules. It's about our spiritual state. It's about our relationship with our Creator. It's about the relationship that we have with someone who loves us so much, he knows every hair on our head. God breaks the promise of what a king will be like in Jesus so we can have a life we never knew. Because Jesus is God, and he is king. Whenever I'm driving and I see a cop, and maybe you've had this same situation. Whenever I'm driving and I see the cop, my immediate reaction is to look at how fast I'm going, right? Like there's been times where I'm driving the speed limit, and I'm going and I see a cop, foot comes off the pedal, I look down and it's like, oh, I don't know why I did that. Like I'm going the speed limit. In fact, I've even had cruise control on at times and I put my foot on the brake to slow down. The next thing that I do after seeing a cop is I check to make sure, okay, I do like this mental thing, like were my headlights out, are my blinkers working, my car's not too loud, is my music too loud? Like I start going through all these things that could possibly be wrong that a cop would pull me over. And then you get even more paranoid, or at least I do, when I pass when I pass by and then all of a sudden I see the cop pull out. The lights don't have to be on. This has happened a number of times where the cop just pulls out because he's going somewhere else. And like I start worrying and I'm like, oh no, did you know the extra fries that they put in my McDonald's bag, or the cheeseburger, and I forgot to tell someone, like, did they call the cops? Like, is there something that I did in the past? Like maybe I was speeding and they got me on a monitor at one point and now they're coming to pull me over. Like my mind starts going through that, through like every possible scenario about why this cop is pulling over. That is how we think, and that is how Israel was thinking about a king. If we follow the rules, if we just follow everything that we're supposed to, if we make sure we don't kill anyone, if we make sure we do all these things, then God will love us. God will accept us. If I give my time and I make sure that I go to the temple, or in our case today, if I go to church, if I make sure that I do all these things, if I'm following the rules, if I'm giving my time to helping people, then that's good enough. We think that maybe if I take the different truths, so I'm a moral person, and I apply them to my life, that's what God desires. And in no means do I mean to say negative things about it. In no means do I mean to say that God doesn't care about us following things that are good for us, by following laws and rules. In no way am I saying that God doesn't care that we're not coming to church. But it's not about the rule. It's not about, well, as long as you do all these things, or you don't do all these things, you're fine. Like you can come right up to this line. You can tiptoe to the edge of the water, and up until that point is fine. But as soon as you go in, it's too much. See, that's what we think. That's what Israel was thinking of the king. But Christ thinks differently. Christ doesn't think about, what are all the possibilities that I need to do in order to be okay? What are all the possibilities that I need to do so that way the cop doesn't pull over, turn his siren on, and then ticket me? The way Christ thinks is more like how you play with a kid. And I don't know how long it's been since you've had the opportunity to play with a kid. But when you play with a kid, especially if you're playing a game or you're playing something that's of their own imagination, they set the rules, right? And you need to know what is happening in the world and the context of that child in order to really play with them. Or else, I'm thinking of, playing Monopoly, and how they're, kids a lot of times, and I remember playing with a couple of teens, they would just make up the rules, right? And the rules that you had to play by, or else they would get super upset. It's the heart of the matter, right? They don't care necessarily about the rules of Monopoly. They don't care about it. The heart of the matter is they want to play this game. And they have a certain imagination and they have a certain perspective on how that is going to be fun. It's not about tiptoeing to the edge of the rules. For a kid, it's about the heart of the issue. It's about how can this be fun? How can I enjoy this with myself and with my friends? Christ comes as king. He comes as teacher. He comes as God. And he says, look, yes, here are the laws. Here are the things that are established, the way that you thought you had to live. But listen to what I'm saying. Listen to the heart of the issue of what it is I am saying. It's not about following the rules. It's not about being the most powerful. It's about being humble, about being poor in spirit. It's about hungering for God. Look at what I'm saying. Search for what it means. Multiple times when Christ was teaching, he would get frustrated because they didn't understand what it is that he was saying. And they would come to him. And while Christ was upset that his disciples didn't understand what it was that he was saying, they were searching. And because they were searching, he would give to them. And the last thing is to draw closer. Draw closer. God broke his promise of King of Israel so that we could live a life we never knew. And the question I want to ask today is, are you willing to serve? Are you willing to follow that kind of king? Are you willing to follow a king? Are you willing to follow a Christ who wants to change your life and not just have you follow a set of rules? Because what it means for Christ to be king of our life, for Christ to rule in our life, is that we are willing to allow him to change us. We are willing to allow him to set a different mandate, to say that we're blessed when we're poor in spirit, or when we mourn, or when we're meek. And that it's not just about following the rules and giving and him taking, but instead it's about life transformation. Thank you everyone for joining us today, and I pray that as we go through this week of remembering what Christ did, that you will allow him to work in you to change you. God bless.